Now I'm standing next to this chamber, and we blow this thing up. It's the loudest thing I've ever heard. It shook the whole building, blew out all the pressure sensors, which I had to rebuy for the university. But it helps us validate an acoustic monitoring system.
So we always understood that this was the wrong material for submersible hulls because with each pressure cycle, you can have progressive damage.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Today is exactly 3 weeks since the Titan disaster. I want to show you how much we've learned in that time, and despite some snarky remarks about everyone's becoming a carbon fiber expert, I don't think it's rocket science to diagnose what went wrong with the engineering or how and where and why the implosion occurred, given all the information we now have at our disposal.
Worth playing for?
Yeah.
But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the thousands of you who have subscribed. In the next episode, I'm going to be taking you guys through a fascinating analysis of the Pogue report. Did you know that after David Pogue's CBS report, it was a 10-minute special on CBS Sunday morning. It aired on November 27th, 2022. OceanGate were very unhappy with the story, and Titan only lasted 3 more dives after that episode aired. So we're going to cover that in the next analysis. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started.
With the acoustic monitoring system, we can tell if the hull has had some problem over time. Maybe it was run into by a forklift and we didn't know it, or dropped in its transport on its way to the East Coast, because the pressure and temperature at 1,000 meters and 2,000 meters and 3,000 meters is always the same. And
something that the CEO admitted to David Pogue was that he likes messing with people's heads. And what you hear from Stockton Rush right here is he talks about a monitoring system that's going to be able to tell you over time whether something has happened to the submersible, not below the ocean, but above the ocean. And that's not really what you want it for. You want to know whether there's something like cyclical failure occurring. But it seems like he doesn't want to let on that is the real danger facing his creation, and it was. So, number one, carbon fiber is easy to understand. If you're a triathlete, a mountain biker, or a cyclist, with just a little experience with carbon fiber forks, frames, or rims, you know that carbon fiber is rigid and light, but also it can crack and break suddenly. It doesn't matter whether you're talking bicycles or submersibles, carbon fiber, no matter how strong, can crack and break suddenly. Number two, the design elements of Titan weren't innovative, they were dumb. If OceanGate wanted to prove that they could get to the Titanic in an experimental craft using experimental designs and experimental materials, they succeeded. So there's no argument with that. They did manage to get a carbon fiber based craft to the depths of Titanic. They did manage to achieve that. But it was still a risky move if that was all they were trying to do. But that isn't what they were just trying to do. What they wanted to do was build a regular shuttle to the bottom of the ocean and back. The whole point was to go on regular missions far more frequently than any other commercial vehicle. The reality is, like the summit of Everest, just getting to the depths of Titanic once wasn't the finishing line. So you couldn't say that you proved yourself once you got to the Titanic. In the same way, you can't say once you reach the summit of Everest and you've taken your summit photo, you've proved all there is to prove. You've still got to get yourself down the mountain. In OceanGate's case, you've still got to get yourself back to the surface, not just that day, but for several days and several missions over a long period of time, with the hull not showing cyclical failure. OceanGate's purpose was to do multiple commercial missions. In other words, they needed a craft that was capable of multiple use and one that wouldn't show signs of weathering and damage. It's strange because if your goal is to do multiple trips up and down to the Titanic, it's hard to imagine a crappier material than carbon fiber. John Ramsey, engineer for the Five Deeps expedition, described carbon fiber breaking one fiber at a time. And I think it was James Cameron who described this gradual decay.
So it's quite insidious, because you may have a number of successful dives, which is what happened here, and then have it fail later.
Well, that is exactly what it is. It is a gradual decay that's insidious. You know it's happening, like an underinflated tire. You know that it is kind of gradually getting worse, but the moment of failure still kind of sneaks up on you all the same.
It's completely inappropriate for a vessel that sees external pressure.
Number 3, too thin. As if the carbon fiber choice wasn't bad enough, the craft was also at least 2 inches thinner than the specifications. To give you an idea of what we're talking about, consider how thin a tin can is and how easily 1 times atmosphere can deform it. And I'll put a link to this particular experiment in the description. You can go and watch it on your own time. Now, then number 4, composites. The problem with composites is that you give up elasticity for rigidity. You also have different levels of degradation throughout the composite. It's easy to imagine that in a pressure situation that rigidity is the same as strength, but it's not. Stockton Rush seemed to have some understanding of elasticity, for example, in the way the acrylic porthole deformed under pressure. The problem is that carbon fiber doesn't. Instead of deforming, it breaks, it splinters, it cracks, it snaps, it breaks. Number 5, combinations. Some argue that it's not so much the carbon fiber, but the combinations of different materials that caused the ship to fail. It is true that there were at least 3 large puzzle pieces comprising the submersible: titanium, carbon fiber, and the acrylic window. Each was relatively different in terms of elasticity and stiffness. So yes, it's possible these differences worked antagonistically, breaking seals, etc. In my opinion, although the combinations explanation is valid, I suspect if the carbon fiber didn't eventually fail catastrophically, it would still be a primary reason for adjacent seals to come loose. I'm also not as swayed by folks raising the glue issue. If the glue issue was as serious as many claim, one would imagine the craft, if it was going to fail, would have failed on its first deepest dive. The glue issue also misses the point, which is that as the submersible drifts lower, the pressure creates a seal, and so the glue isn't really even necessary. Imagine 2 hands pushing the titanium ends towards each other. Even if the glue did fail, the pressure is still going to hold the craft together. In my opinion, it was the middle of the sausage area that was the weakest link, not the ends. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was nearer the center of the sausage than at the ends, where the fatal flaw occurred, leading to the implosion. In any event, I don't think there's a lack of evidence that the carbon fiber hull was constantly, consistently, and actively cracking and breaking. Of all the debris pieces we saw being offloaded, the only thing missing was the central cylinder, obviously no longer intact, and then also the acrylic window. Somehow, those inside the craft seemed to think if there was a lot of cracking noise and then less, that meant the danger had passed and the craft had adapted to its environment. In reality, there were just fewer fibers left to crack, perhaps as pressure decreased. We also know that Stockton Rush had described these cracking noises and loud bangs as normal when they weren't normal. They were signs that the hull was failing.
They were on descent, they were a couple hundred meters above the seafloor, and they dropped their weights. Now, the only way for the ship to know that they had dropped their ascent weights, which would be an emergency abort, is if they had called that in, that they were ascending. So I believe now that they had some warning, that they heard some acoustic signature of the hull beginning to delaminate. An investigation will hopefully eventually show what did happen, because we all need to know as we go forward. The deep submergence community needs to know exactly what happened.
Obviously, when James Cameron is talking about delaminating, what he's actually talking about is cracking. Let me repeat, carbon fiber can crack and break suddenly. Carbon fiber was constantly cracking and breaking on the Titan submersible. The integrity of the craft was suffering gradual cyclical failure. And so, what ultimately happened? The sausage section imploded and blew out the window. Think of it as a threadbare tire holding up the weight of a vehicle. And eventually that thread of an old perished tire punctures. When it does, the whole tire implodes. Number 6, the implosion didn't catch them by surprise. Interestingly, the submersible didn't implode without warning. From what James Cameron has shared, it dropped its weights and was ascending. What this seems to indicate is that for a brief period, the crew knew something serious had happened. Perhaps there was a loud bang. Perhaps there was a series of loud bangs that got worse. Whatever it was, despite their resolve, the entire crew were actually aborting the mission, because whatever they heard and experienced was a serious enough sign that they were facing some sort of critical failure, and then they did. I also think this corresponds to carbon fiber doing what we know it does. It cracks, it cracks, it cracks, and then suddenly it breaks. Does that make sense? I'm not going to take it further than that, but please look out for my next video in this series, the Pogue Report. It's going to be really groundbreaking, so look out for that. Thank you for listening. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday weekend, and I'll see you guys next time.